I had 12 seasons as a smokejumper before I saw a fire that didn't want to finish. 12 seasons meant I'd jumped into fires in 5 states, worked as crew foreman for the last 4 years, and had developed the particular kind of professional calm that comes from having made every catastrophic mistake early enough to survive it. I did not rattle easily. I knew what fire did and why it did it. That knowledge is the thing I keep returning to now, because what I saw in the Ochocos in late August did not do what fire does. I was stationed out of the Bureau of Land Management's Prineville Air Center in Central Oregon. The base sits at the edge of the high desert where the ponderosa pine begins to thicken and the Ochoco Mountains fold into draws deep enough to swallow sound. The terrain there is not scenery. It is data. The kind of data that keeps 8 people alive when you put them on a ridgeline at dawn with hand tools and tell them to hold a line against something that moves faster than they can run. I know the difference between a wind-driven run and a terrain-influenced blow-up. I know what happens when a fire crowns and what happens when it drops back to the ground. I know the sound a snag makes 3 seconds before it falls and the smell of a spot fire that has been burning for 6 hours versus one that has been burning for 2. I know these things the way I know the weight of my pack and the placement of my hands on a Pulaski handle. They are not things I think about. They are things I am. That is what I built myself on, the reliability of that knowledge. The Ochocos in late August are a mix of ponderosa and lodgepole, steep draws running east-west, ridges that catch wind and hold it. The forest there is dense enough to burn hot and dry enough to burn fast. I have jumped into that country 4 times in 12 seasons. I know how fire moves through it. I know what to expect. What I saw there did not do what fire does. I am not building to a ghost story. I am building to a problem I cannot solve with the tools I have. That distinction matters to me. I want it to matter to you. The Prineville office has me scheduled for a jump in the same region next August. The grid is listed in the rotation. The terrain is flagged as high priority response. I have seen the schedule. I have not requested a reassignment. I keep returning to that. Not to the fire itself, not yet, but to the fact that I looked at the schedule and did not ask to be moved. I could have. No one would have questioned it. Crew rotation is standard. Reassignment requests are logged and processed without comment. I have filed them before for reasons that mattered less. I did not file one this time. I do not know why I did not file one. That is the part I cannot account for. I built 12 seasons on knowing what I was doing and why I was doing it, and now I am choosing to go back to a place I cannot explain with knowledge that is no longer useful. That choice sits in me like a foreign object. I can feel its edges. I cannot remove it. The silence after that realization is where the story begins. The jump order came in at 7:03 on Wednesday morning, August 23rd. I was in the ready room at Prineville Air Center drinking coffee that had been sitting on the burner since 5 a.m. The dispatcher called my name from the doorway. "Lightning ignition," she said. "BLM grid northeast of Mitchell, crew of 8. I set the coffee down and walked to the briefing room. The dispatch packet was waiting on the table, the aerial photograph clipped to the top sheet. I pulled it toward me and studied the terrain. Grid T12S R20E, Section 14. Steep draws running east-west through dense ponderosa and lodgepole. No maintained trails. The notation at the bottom of the page read, "No structures on current BLM map." I read that line twice. The phrase sat in my mind with a weight I couldn't account for yet. The fire had been burning approximately 18 hours. Standard lightning start, single point of origin, moving through roadless terrain the Prineville office managed but rarely visited. I traced the grid lines with my thumb. The draws were deep enough to trap heat and channel wind. The ridge saddles would be exposed. It was terrain that burned predictably, if you understood what it would do. I called my crew. We loaded the aircraft at 0740. The flight out was 30 minutes, the air smooth and cool at altitude, the sun angling in from the east and lighting the ridgelines below in sharp relief. I sat near the open door with the dispatch packet on my lap and watched the terrain pass beneath us. Ponderosa thickening as we moved northeast, the high desert flattening into folds of gray-green forest. Smoke was visible ahead, a column rising from the grid we were flying toward. The radio crackled. Teresa Navarro's voice came through, steady and clear. She was flying the air tanker ahead of us, running an infrared sweep of the burn perimeter before we jumped.
Jump lead, this is Tanker 27. I've got your grid on thermal.
I keyed the radio. Copy, 27. What are you seeing? There was a pause. Not long, but noticeable. Teresa didn't pause unless she was choosing her words carefully.
The fire's burning clean,
she said.
Draws are fully involved. Ridge saddles are lit. Canopy torching consistent with wind direction. Fuel consumption is total.
I waited. There was more coming.
The infrared signature reads surgical,
she said.
I'm using that word deliberately.
I pulled my field notebook from my chest pocket and wrote the word down. Surgical. I underlined it once. Explain surgical, I said.
Every natural fuel source in the grid I can read is consumed,
Teresa said.
The pattern is uniform. No cold pockets, no unburned fingers, no mosaic. It's burning edge to edge.
That was unusual, but not impossible. A hot fire in dense fuel with steady wind could burn that way. I wrote uniform consumption beneath the word surgical.
Except,
Teresa said. I looked up from the notebook.
There's an oval-shaped area near the center of the burn perimeter,
she said.
Approximately 2 acres. It's reading cold on infrared.
Cold or cooler?
Cold,
she said.
It reads like open water, but there's no water on the map.
I pulled the aerial photograph from the dispatch packet and studied it again. No water features marked in that grid. No lakes, no streams large enough to show on the survey. I looked at the date stamp on the photograph. 2019. Confirm no water source visible, I said.
Confirmed,
Teresa said.
The cold spot is there. I'm telling you what I'm seeing.
I wrote, cold spot, center perimeter, in the notebook. Beneath it I wrote, no water on map. I didn't have an explanation. Terrain could hold moisture in ways that didn't show on a photograph. A buried spring, a rock formation that channeled runoff. I filed it as an anomaly I would account for on the ground. Copy 27, I said. We'll check it on descent.
Be careful down there,
Teresa said. Her voice was even, professional, but there was something beneath it I couldn't name. Teresa had flown retardant drops over the Ochocos for 9 years. She knew what fire looked like from the air. If she was choosing her words this carefully, it meant she had seen something she couldn't fit into the usual categories. The radio went quiet. I looked down at the notebook. The word surgical was there in my handwriting, black ink on the gray page. I closed the notebook and put it back in my chest pocket. My crew was checking their gear, running through jump protocols, their voices low and steady in the noise of the aircraft. I had jumped into fires in 5 states over 12 seasons. I had seen fire do unusual things. Fires moved in ways that defied prediction when terrain and wind aligned in certain combinations. I believed, at that moment, that I would find a terrain explanation on the ground. I was not rattled. The spotter called 2 minutes to jump. I stood and moved to the door. The air outside was smoke-heavy, the gray haze thickening as we descended toward the grid. Below us, the burn scar was visible, a dark stain spreading through the forest. I could see the ridgeline where we would land, the clear cut from an old thinning operation, the standing timber beyond it. The spotter tapped my shoulder. I checked my static line one last time and stepped to the edge of the door. The wind hit my face, warm and sharp with the smell of burning pine. I jumped. The word surgical was still sitting in my field notes. The landing zone was a ridge clear-cut, scarred from a thinning operation that looked 5 or 6 years old. The stumps were weathered gray, and the ground was loose with slash and dry needle mat. Smoke sat heavy to the south and east, a flat gray wall that smelled like wet char and resin. I pulled my compass and took a bearing toward the cold spot Teresa had radioed about. 260 degrees downslope into the burn scar. I signaled the crew, and we started moving. The ground under my boots was what I expected. Gray ash over red soil, the texture of it fine and loose where it had settled after the crown fire passed through. Standing dead timber, black trunks still upright with the bark burned off. A stump smoldering near the bottom of the ridge, orange glow visible through the crack in the wood. Normal. I read it the way I always read post-fire terrain, cataloging what the fire had done and where the fuel load would push it next. Wind direction, slope angle, moisture content in the unburned timber ahead. Everything I saw confirmed a fire behaving within known parameters. We crossed into deeper ash. The crew spread out in a loose line, keeping visual contact. I could hear boots crunching through the char layer, the occasional crack of a burned snag settling. Standard sounds. The air was still enough that the smoke hung in place rather than moving. Asher Davenport fell in beside me about 10 minutes into the descent. He had done 6 seasons, grew up outside Prinville, and was one of the more experienced members of the crew. He walked with the same steady rhythm I did, boots finding solid ground without having to look for it. He did not speak for a few minutes. Then he did. "I want to work the eastern flank," he said. I glanced at him. His face was calm, no urgency in it. He was not asking for a reason I could see. "Any particular reason?" I asked. "Just a preference," Asher said. I looked ahead at the terrain. The eastern flank was a reasonable placement. It would put him on the upslope side of the burn, working the edge where the fire was most likely to spot over into unburned fuel. It was not an easy assignment, but it was not a bad one. "All right," I said. He nodded once and moved off to the side, letting the rest of the crew pass him. He did not explain further. I noted the request because Asher had never before asked to be placed anywhere specific. In 12 seasons, I had learned that when experienced people make quiet, specific requests without explanation, you file it. I did not ask him why. I am still deciding whether that was the right call. I have not asked him since either. We moved deeper into the burn scar. The ash was thicker here, built up in drifts against the downslope side of the dead timber. The smell was sharper, less resin and more pure carbon. I kept my bearing and checked my map every few minutes, matching the terrain to the grid lines. We were moving into the approximate center of the section Teresa had identified, the cold spot. The smoke should have been denser here. That was the first thing I noticed that did not fit. We were in the middle of a burn that had torched through dense ponderosa and lodgepole, and the smoke was lighter than it had been on the ridge. Not gone, just thinner. I could see farther through it than I should have been able to. I stopped and looked around. The crew kept moving, then noticed I had stopped and slowed. I did not call them back. I was listening. Draws this deep usually hold sound differently. The slope and the timber create a kind of acoustic pocket, and you hear things echo in a way they do not on open ground. This draw was not holding anything. The sound of the crew moving was flat, no resonance. I could hear my own breathing and the creak of my pack straps and nothing else. I started moving again. The crew followed. 40 minutes in, the terrain began to flatten. The slope eased off and the ash layer thinned where the wind had scoured it down to bare soil. I could see from the map that we were close to the center of the grid. The cold spot should be directly ahead. The crew was spread out in a line about 30 yards wide, moving at the same steady pace. I was watching the ground, reading the burn patterns, when I realized no one was moving anymore. I had not given an order. No one had spoken. But the crew had stopped, all of them at once. standing in place with their tools resting against the ground. I looked up from the ash to see what had stopped them. It was an oval, maybe 2 acres across at the widest point. Grass and bare earth. The ponderosa ringing it stood burned on every side facing outward, bark blackened and curled, needles scorched to rust. Every side facing inward was green. The fire had come to the edge and stopped. Not slowed, not banked by wind shift or moisture differential. Stopped. The grass inside the clearing was the kind of green you see in June, not late August after a lightning strike had been burning for 18 hours. At the center stood a farmhouse. I didn't move. My crew didn't move. We stood at the tree line with our tools resting against the ground, and I looked at the structure the way you look at something that shouldn't be there but is. 1 story. Board and batten siding gone gray with weather, a covered porch on the south face, a stone chimney rising from the east end. The construction looked old. Pre-war, maybe older. Hand-built, the kind of work you see in homestead country where someone put it up themselves and made it square enough to last. There was laundry on a line strung between the porch post and a pine tree just beyond it. 2 shirts and a pair of work trousers, still damp, moving slightly in the air that crossed the clearing. In the window on the south face, a kerosene lamp was burning. I turned to Asher. He was standing 3 feet to my left, his Pulaski resting against his boot, his eyes on the house. His face was blank in the way faces go blank when someone is working hard not to show anything. "Stay here," I said. He nodded once. I walked the perimeter. I kept the crew at the tree line and moved clockwise around the clearing, staying just inside the burn scar where the ash was thick enough to muffle my steps. The chimney was cold when I got close enough to check. No smoke, no heat shimmer. I circled the entire structure and found no vehicle, no road leading in or out, no power line, no water tank, no tire tracks in the grass, no footprints except the ones I was leaving. I stopped on the east side and pulled my BLM map from my pack, then the supplemental aerial from the dispatch packet. I spread them both against my thigh and traced the grid coordinates with my finger. The clearing was there. I could see it now that I knew where to look. A pale oval gap in the dark canopy of ponderosa. But there was no structure marked. No notation. I checked the aerial's date stamp in the bottom right corner. 2019. 5 years old. The photograph showed the clearing. The structure was there, a small rectangular shadow at the center. It had not been mapped. I folded the aerial and put it back in my pack. Then I walked across the clearing to the house. The grass was thick under my boots, unburned, damp at the base where dew hadn't burned off yet. The air smelled like cut hay, not smoke. I climbed the 3 steps to the porch and stopped at the door. It was wood, no window, a simple iron latch. I lifted it and pushed. The door swung inward without sound. The interior was a single main room, maybe 20 feet across. A wood stove stood against the north wall, black iron, the kind with a flat top for cooking. A table and 2 chairs sat near the center, plain construction, no finish. Shelves lined the east wall, stocked with dry goods, canned beans, a cloth bag of flour, a glass jar of coffee, a tin of salt. At the back, a curtain hung across an alcove that I assumed was a sleeping area. Everything was placed with the kind of order you see in a space that gets used daily. Lived in, not stored. What stopped me was the dust. There wasn't any. I stood just inside the door and looked at the shelves, at the windowsills, at the surface of the table. No film, no trace. I crossed to the wood stove and ran my finger along the top. It came away clean. I held it up to the light from the kerosene lamp burning on the table. Nothing, not a particle. The air in the room felt still, not stale, not dead, just unmoved, like the air inside the house and the air outside it were not in communication with each other. I turned slowly, looking for a draft, for any sign of circulation. The flame in the kerosene lamp stood perfectly vertical, not even a flicker. I walked to the curtained alcove and pulled it aside. A narrow bed, a wool blanket folded at the foot, a shelf with a wash basin and a folded towel. I touched the towel, dry but not stiff, recently used or maintained. I let the curtain fall back. I was inside for less than 3 minutes. I walked out, closed the door behind me, and crossed the clearing back to where my crew was waiting. "Line to the south," I said. "Stay clear of the clearing. Work the perimeter where the burn scar meets the active edge." They moved without questions. Asher was already shouldering his pack before I finished speaking. I watched them file south along the tree line. Then I pulled my radio. "Prinville Dispatch, this is Harvey." The radio crackled.
Go ahead, Harvey.
"I need a records check on a structure. Grid Tango 1 to Sierra, Romeo 20 Echo, Section 14. Coordinates follow." I read them off the map, then waited.
Copy. Stand by.
I stood at the edge of the clearing and watched the house. The laundry moved slightly on the line. The lamp burned in the window. 40 minutes passed before the radio crackled again.
Harvey, Prinville Dispatch.
"Go ahead."
No structure on file for those coordinates. No recorded owner, no utility records, no access easement. Grid shows BLM management, roadless designation.
I looked at the house. "Copy. Anything else in the file?" A pause.
There's a notation in the dispatch log. You want me to read it?
"Go ahead." Another pause. Longer this time.
Reported fire start in that grid, late August. 11 of the last 14 years. Each fire contained before road contact. Cause listed as undetermined on all 11.
I didn't say anything. The dispatcher's voice came back, quieter.
You want me to read that again?
"Yeah." She read it again. The numbers didn't change. "Copy," I said. "Harvey out." I clipped the radio back to my belt and stood there, the notation still in my ear. 11 fires in 14 years. Same grid, same time of year. Each one contained before it reached a road. Cause undetermined. I looked at the house, at the clearing, at the ponderosa burned on every outward face and green on every inward face. Then I started my second circuit, looking for something in the terrain that could explain what I was seeing. The ash on the north side of the house was deeper than anywhere else I'd walked. It held the shape of the ground underneath, the slight slope away from the foundation, the shallow depression where water probably pooled in spring. I moved slowly, watching where I put my feet, not wanting to disturb more than I had to. That's when I saw them. Boot prints, fresh ones. They were pressed clean into the ash, sharp-edged, the kind of impression you only get when ash has settled and cooled completely. Which meant after the fire had passed through. Which meant recently. I crouched next to the nearest print. A man's boot, work sole, heavy tread. Not a pattern I recognized. Not Forest Service issue. Not the kind of logger's boot you saw around Prinville. The depth was even, no stumble or drag. Whoever made them had been walking steady. I stood and followed the line of prints with my eyes. They came from the direction of the house's rear door, moved north through the clearing in a straight line, and kept going into the burn scar on the far side. They went toward the fire, not away from it. I started walking. The prints crossed the clearing without deviation. No pause at the tree line, no hesitation where the green grass gave way to ash and scorched ground. They entered the burn scar and kept the same heading. North, directly north. I followed them into the scar. The ash was thinner here, mixed with red soil where the ground showed through. The prints were still clear, still evenly spaced, still walking in a straight line that didn't follow any path or terrain feature I could see. They didn't navigate. That's what struck me. There were fallen logs, standing dead timber, places where the ground buckled or dropped away. The prints walked through all of it in the same unwavering line, as if whoever made them had been moving toward a fixed point they could see, and I couldn't. The fire front was ahead. I could hear it now, the low, steady sound of active combustion. I could smell the difference in the smoke. I kept my eyes on the prints. They walked for maybe 200 yards into the burn scar. Then they stopped. Not at a threshold, not at an obstacle. They stopped in open ground, mid-stride. The left boot was planted full. The right boot was forward, heel down. The toe not yet pressed into the ash. And then nothing. I stood there looking at the last print for a long time. Then I looked up. The fire front was approximately half a mile north. I could see the glow through the timber, the occasional flare where a standing snag caught and torched. The smoke was thick enough to blur detail, but not thick enough to hide what I was looking at. There was a gap in the fire, a corridor, narrow, running in a straight line from where I stood back south toward the clearing, maybe 30 yards wide. The fire was burning on both sides of it. I could see the active flame on the east edge, the heavy smoke column on the west. But the corridor itself was untouched. Green timber, unburned ground. A clean path held open through the burn. I turned and looked back the way I'd come. The corridor ran straight to the clearing, straight to the house. I looked north again. The corridor continued past where I could see, running toward the fire front, held open like a lane. I stood there for a while. I'm not sure how long. I was trying to build a physical explanation. A rock formation that could redirect wind at ground level. A moisture differential from a buried spring that would create a fuel break. A terrain feature I hadn't seen on the map that could account for a corridor this narrow, this straight, this clean. I found nothing. I know what terrain-influenced fire behavior looks like. I've seen wind redirect around ridges, moisture halt spread along creek beds, fires burn upslope and leave the draws untouched. I know the shapes those make, the irregularities, the way they follow the contour of the land. This didn't. This was a straight line, deliberate, maintained. The corridor was not an accident of terrain. I was standing at the place where the boot prints stopped mid-stride, looking north up the corridor of unburned forest with fire burning on both sides of it, and my radio crackled. The spotter's voice came through before I'd taken 3 steps back from where the prints stopped.
Harvey, you need to see this.
Static crackled.
Fire's reversed.
I keyed the radio. Say again.
Forward spread reverse direction. Last 20 minutes. No wind shift I can read. It's moving back south.
I looked north up the corridor. The fire front was visible through the unburned gap, orange light pulsing against the smoke column beyond. I watched it for 10 seconds. The light wasn't receding. Confirm wind direction, I said.
Steady from the southwest. Same as it's been all morning.
A pause. Fire's not.
Not following it.
I turned and started back toward the clearing. My boots kicked ash with each step. The corridor stayed clear on both sides, the fire burning parallel to it but not crossing. I kept my eyes on the tree line ahead.
Harvey,
The spotter's voice again.
you want me to call for extraction?
I didn't answer until I reached the edge of the burn scar where the ash thinned and the scorched timber began. The clearing was visible through the trees. The house sat at its center, the lamp still burning in the south window. Call it, I said. East Ridge Meadow. Tell them we're moving now. I switched channels and keyed the crew frequency. All units, this is Harvey. Conditions have shifted. Lines not holding. Move to extraction point, East Ridge Meadow. Acknowledge. The responses came back in order. 6 voices, clipped confirmations, no questions. Then Asher's voice, last in the sequence.
Copy. Already moving.
I stopped at the tree line. Already moving. I looked east through the clearing. The eastern flank was the far side, past the house, where the burn scar gave way to standing timber again. I could see two figures in Nomex gear working their way up through the trees toward the ridge. One of them was Asher. He wasn't running. He was walking with the steady uphill pace of someone who had started moving before the order came. I keyed the radio again. All units, maintain spacing. No one moves alone. Check in at the meadow. More confirmations. I clipped the radio back to my belt and stood there. 6 seasons. He'd worked 6 seasons under me and had never asked to be placed anywhere specific until this morning. The eastern flank. The side of the clearing that led most directly to the extraction meadow. The side that would get him out first if the crew had to move fast. I thought about the way he'd said it. Not a request exactly. A quiet statement of preference, delivered in a tone that didn't invite questions. I hadn't pressed him. I'd assigned him there and moved on. The same way I moved on from 100 small crew decisions every season that didn't need explanation. I started moving up through the clearing, angling east to follow my crew's line. The grass was still green under my boots. The air smelled like ash and pine resin, but inside the clearing it was thinner, less smoke than there should have been with a fire this close. I kept my eyes on the ground, watching for more prints, but the grass showed nothing. The house sat to my left as I crossed. The laundry line was strung between the porch post and the pine, 2 shirts and a pair of work trousers hanging damp and motionless. The lamp burned steady in the window. I didn't look at it directly. I kept walking. Asher grew up outside Prineville. That was in his file, the same way the town you grew up in is always in your file because it's one of the lines on the form. It hadn't meant anything to me when I read it. Prineville was the nearest town to the air center. A lot of crew members came from Prineville or Redmond or Bend, the small high desert towns that dot central Oregon, where wildland firework is steady summer employment if you can pass the physical. But Prineville wasn't just near the air center. Prineville was near here, these mountains, this grid. I reached the tree line on the east side and stopped. My crew was already up the slope, moving through the burned timber in a loose single file. I could see Asher near the front. He wasn't looking back. I keyed the radio. Harvey to spotter. What's the fire's current position?
Still moving south. Slower now, but it's not stopping. You've got maybe 20 minutes before it reaches the clearing perimeter.
20 minutes. I looked back across the clearing. The house was small from this angle, the lamp a dim point of light in the window. The laundry moved slightly on the line. Not wind. Just the air shifting the way air shifts when it's not quite still. I thought about the way Asher had moved when I gave the extraction order. Already moving. Not scrambling, not surprised. Moving the way you move when you've been waiting for something you knew was coming. He'd asked for the eastern flank, the flank that led to the extraction point, the flank that would get him out first. He'd known. Not guessed, not suspected. Known. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know how far back the knowing went, or what he'd been told, or who had told him. I didn't know if he'd expected the house to be here or if he'd just expected something, some reason to leave fast when the order came. I didn't know, and I wasn't going to ask. That decision settled in my chest the way decisions settle when you make them without thinking them through first, when your body decides before your brain catches up. I wasn't going to ask Asher what he knew. I wasn't going to pull him aside after we got back to Prineville and ask him why he'd requested the eastern flank or why he'd been moving before the order came. I wasn't going to file a note in my incident report that one of my crew members had displayed foreknowledge of hazardous conditions. I was going to let it sit. The spotter's voice crackled again.
Harvey, you still at the clearing?
Moving now, I said. I turned and started up the slope. The burned timber was thin here, most of it still standing. The bark scorched black, but the trunks intact. My boots found purchase in the ash and loose soil. I didn't look back. The crew was a quarter-mile ahead, visible as moving shapes through the haze. Asher was still near the front. I kept my pace steady, not hurrying, letting the distance between us hold. The clearing dropped away below. I could still see the house if I turned my head, a small gray shape at the center of the green oval, smoke beginning to thicken around it as the fire moved closer. The lamp was still burning. I didn't turn my head. The slope steepened. I focused on the ground in front of me, the placement of each step, the rhythm of breathing that keeps you moving uphill without burning out. My radio stayed quiet. The crew was moving well. No one had fallen behind. Asher had known. That was the thing I kept coming back to. Not suspected, not worried. Known. He'd asked for the position that would get him out, and when the order came, he'd already been moving. And now he was near the front of the crew climbing toward the meadow where the helicopter would take us out. He'd known, and I'd let him have the eastern flank without asking why. I reached the ridgeline 20 minutes after leaving the clearing. The meadow opened up ahead, a flat stretch of grass and wildflowers surrounded by unburned forest. My crew was there, 7 figures in yellow Nomex standing in a loose group near the center. Asher was with them. He was drinking from his water bottle, his hard hat off, his face red from the climb. I walked past him to check in with my spotter, who was standing at the meadow's north edge with his binoculars trained on the valley below. "Fire reached the clearing," he said. 5 minutes ago. I didn't ask what he'd seen. I radioed dispatch and confirmed extraction, gave them our position and head count, told them we were ready for pickup. The helicopter was already inbound. Estimated arrival 10 minutes. I walked back to the crew. They were sitting now, most of them, catching their breath. Asher was sitting apart from the others, his back against a pine, his eyes on the ground. He didn't look up when I passed. I stood at the edge of the meadow and looked south. Smoke was rising from the valley, a thick gray column that spread and flattened as it climbed. The clearing was somewhere under that smoke. The house was somewhere under that smoke. The lamp had still been burning when I turned away. I heard the helicopter before I saw it, the low thud of rotors echoing off the ridgeline. It came in from the east, a Forest Service ship, and settled into the meadow with practiced precision. My crew loaded in without needing to be told. Asher was third in line. He climbed into the back and sat down and didn't speak. I was the last one in. I pulled the door shut and gave the pilot the thumbs up, and we lifted off. The meadow dropped away. The valley spread out below us, the burn scar a black smear across the green forest, the smoke column rising from somewhere near its center. I couldn't see the clearing from this angle. I couldn't see the house. I sat back in my seat and closed my eyes. Asher didn't speak for the entire flight back to Prenville. I was 2/3 of the way up the ridge when I turned back. My crew was already at the extraction meadow. I could hear their voices carrying down through the timber, muted but steady. The air was cooler up here, thinner. My legs burned from the climb. I stopped to adjust the pack straps and let my breathing settle. When I looked back down toward the clearing, the house was burning. Every surface was lit at once, the walls, the roof, the porch posts, all of it burning with the same even intensity, no darker spots, no progression from a point of origin. I have seen structure fires. I have seen them in timber country where the fuel load is heavy and the air is dry, and a single ember can take a building from smoke to full involvement in under 4 minutes. A fully involved structure fire produces a column. It produces visible combustion gases, particulate, the black-gray billowing that rises vertical and bends with altitude and is visible from miles away. This produced nothing. The house burned with a clean, even orange light that was visible against the tree line. The light had edges. It did not waver, and there was no smoke. Not a trace. Not a wisp rising from the roof line. Not a haze thickening the air above the clearing. The fire was complete, and it was silent, and it generated nothing but light. I stood on the ridge and stared at it. The glass in the south window was intact. I could see it from where I stood, a dark square set into the orange glow of the burning wall. Behind it, the kerosene lamp was still burning. The small, steady flame, yellow against the orange, untouched. I did not move. My hand went to the radio on my chest. The weight of it was familiar, the hard plastic casing warm from my body heat. I could feel the transmit key under my thumb. I did not press it. A truthful report would go into the incident record. A complete account of what I was seeing. A structure fire with no smoke column, no visible combustion gases, glass intact in a window frame while the wall around it burned, would generate a follow-up investigation. It would bring a BLM fire behavior analyst into the grid. It would put questions into dispatch logs that someone would have to answer. It would put my crew back in this grid under official orders, and it would put me back here with them. And whatever this was would still be here waiting. I let the record die with the structure. I stood on the ridge and I watched, and I did not key my radio. The fire burned. The light held steady. I counted seconds in my head the way I used to count when I was new, when I still needed the count to track time during a spot fire run. 1 minute, 2 minutes. The lamp behind the glass kept burning. The walls did not collapse. The roof did not fall in. Everything burned at the same rate, the same intensity, as if the structure had been soaked in accelerant and lit on all sides simultaneously. Then the lamp went out. It did not flicker. It did not dim. One moment it was burning, a small yellow flame visible through the window glass. The next moment, it was not. At the same instant, not after, not before, simultaneously, the fire consuming the house went out. Not died down, not reduced to embers, extinguished. The orange light vanished as if a switch had been thrown. The clearing went dark except for the ambient gray light filtering through the smoke haze that still hung in the canopy above the burn scar. I blinked. My eyes adjusted. The structure was gone. What remained was a stone foundation, clean-edged and level, set into bare earth. The grass of the clearing was green and intact to the very edge of the foundation walls. No scorch marks, no ash drift. The laundry line was down, the rope coiled on the ground near where the porch had been. The pine it had been tied to was standing, unburned, its bark smooth and gray in the failing light. I stood there for another 30 seconds. Then I turned and climbed to the extraction meadow. My crew was sitting in a loose group near the center of the clearing, packs off, helmets on the ground beside them. They looked up when I came through the tree line. No one asked where I had been. I crossed to where my pack was and sat down and drank from my canteen. The water was warm and tasted like plastic. The helicopter arrived 20 minutes later. We heard it before we saw it, the rotor wash carrying down through the canopy and flattening the grass at the meadow's edge. It came in low from the east, the pilot holding a hover while the crew chief leaned out and signaled us forward. We loaded in pairs, gear first, then bodies. I was last in. I sat near the door and clipped my harness, and the crew chief gave the pilot the thumbs up and we lifted. The clearing passed beneath us as we banked south toward Prinville. I could see it through the open door, the oval of green grass, the stone foundation at the center, the pine still standing where the laundry line had been. The foundation was clean. The grass was unbroken. There was no smoke. Asher sat across from me in the jump seat near the rear bulkhead. His helmet was off. His face was turned toward the window. He did not look at me. He did not look at anyone. He sat with his hands folded in his lap and his gaze fixed on something outside the aircraft that I could not see. He did not speak for the entire flight back to Prineville. None of us did. The rotor noise made conversation difficult, but that was not why we were silent. I have flown out of burns where crews talked through the noise anyway, shouting over the engine, their voices hoarse and their faces streaked with ash and their hands gesturing through the replay of what they had just done. We did not do that. We sat in the noise and the vibration and the thin, cold air that came through the open door, and we did not look at each other. The helicopter lifted away from the East Ridge meadow with the crew aboard, and below them the clearing held a clean stone foundation in green grass, the pine still standing, the laundry line gone. The incident report sat on my desk Thursday morning, the form already filled out in my head before I wrote a word. I'd done this 40 times at least. More. The structure of it was automatic. Grid coordinates, crew roster, fuel type, weather conditions, structure loss. I pulled a pen from the desk drawer and started writing. Structure destroyed by fire. That was true enough. Fire behavior erratic due to terrain-influenced wind. Also true if I squinted at it. Wind does things in draws. Everyone knows that. Cause of structure loss, direct flame contact. I wrote it. I signed it. The pen felt heavier than it should have. I didn't describe the order in which the house burned. I didn't mention the boot prints. I didn't mention the corridor. I didn't mention that the fire had reversed direction with no meteorological explanation, that it had moved back south toward the clearing like something recalled. I didn't mention that the house had ignited all at once with no smoke and gone out the moment the lamp did. I filed the report with dispatch and made one request. I told them I needed the historical aerial photograph archive for grid T12S R20E, terrain analysis, standard enough that no one would question it. They said they'd pull what they had. I went back to work. There were other fires. There are always other fires. I worked the line on a brush start east of Madras on Friday, jumped a spot fire in the Warm Springs Reservation on Saturday. Both were clean. Both did what fire does. I came back to Prinville Sunday evening, and the archive request was still pending. Monday morning, the image arrived on my desk. It was in a manila folder, the kind that gets thinner every time someone opens it. I sat down and opened it and pulled out the photograph. Black and white, the grain coarse, the contrast blown out in places where the sun had been too direct. The date stamp in the corner read, August 29, 1961. Survey flight out of Redmond. I looked at it for a long time before I read the notation. The clearing was there. Same oval shape, same dimensions. I could see the shadow line where the tree canopy ended and the grass began. In the center of the clearing, a small rectangular shape. The structure. The roof was pale, almost white in the overexposed print. I could see the chimney on the north side. At the edge of the clearing, on 3 sides, the forest was darker. Not shadow. Burn scar. The fire had come to the boundary and stopped. The notation was typed on a slip of paper clipped to the back of the photograph. Fire cause undetermined. Contained before road contact. I set the photograph down and pulled the dispatch logs. The Prineville office keeps paper logs going back to 1974. Everything before that is microfiche or lost. I started with 74 and worked forward. August fires in grid T12S R20E, section 14, 1 in 74, 1 in 76, 1 in 77, 79, 81, 82, 84. Every August. Not every year, but close. Late August. Every time. Contained before road contact. Cause undetermined. I stopped counting at 23. I sat in the records room with the stack of logs in front of me and the fluorescent lights humming overhead, and I understood what I'd done. Not what the fire was. I didn't understand that. I don't think I meant to. But I understood what I'd ended. The fire wasn't protecting the house. That was the mistake I'd made standing at the tree line, watching it burn. I'd thought the fire had come to the clearing and stopped because the house was there, because something about the house repelled it or held it back. A guardian. Some old superstition made real. That wasn't it. The fire was maintaining a perimeter. It had been maintaining that perimeter for longer than any single fire could burn. 40 years at least. Probably longer. returning every late August to the same grid, burning to the same boundary, consuming everything outside the clearing and leaving everything inside it untouched. A cycle, deliberate, controlled. And when my crew walked in and worked the line and I entered the house and broke whatever the interior of that house was, the stillness, the clean air, the dust that wasn't there, it finished. It burned the house clean and went out. Whatever the cycle was, we triggered its end. I sat there and felt the weight of that settle into me. Not guilt. I hadn't known. But something colder. The certainty that I'd stepped into something older than the records I was holding and I'd ended it without understanding what I was ending. Asher Davenport's face came back to me, sitting in the back of the helicopter, not speaking. He'd asked to work the eastern flank before we'd even descended into the burn scar. He'd been the first one moving when I gave the order to pull back, like he'd been waiting for it. He grew up outside Prineville, 6 seasons on my crew. He knew the Ochocos better than I did. He knew. I could call him. I could ask him what he'd heard, what the locals said about that grid, why he'd wanted to stay on the eastern flank. I could ask him if he knew what the house was or what the cycle had been maintaining. I didn't reach for the phone. I pulled the 1961 aerial photograph back in front of me and looked at the stone foundation at the center of the oval clearing. Same boundary, same notation. 62 years between that image and the one I'd seen from the helicopter, and the clearing hadn't changed. The house had been there in 61. It had been there last Wednesday. It wasn't there now. I set the photograph on my desk and stared at it. The fluorescent lights hummed. The records room was empty, except for me. Outside the window, the high desert stretched flat and pale under the late August sun. I didn't reach for the phone yet. The air center was quieter at evening. The dispatch radios still crackled from the back office, voices calling grid coordinates and wind readings, but the main hangar had gone still. I sat at my desk with the 1961 photograph in front of me, black and white, the clearing visible as a pale oval against the darker mass of forest. The structure was there. Small, centered, a single rectangular shape with a chimney. At the edge of the clearing, the burn scar was visible as a lighter band of gray where the fire had come to the boundary and stopped. The notation at the bottom read, "Fire cause undetermined, contained before road contact, August 29th, 1961. I had the dispatch log stacked beside it. 11 fires in 14 years was what dispatch had told me when I radioed from the ridge. The archived logs went back further. I'd pulled every August fire reported in that grid going back to the earliest records the Prineville office held. The pattern held every year the records existed. 1974 was as far back as I'd gone before I stopped counting. I set the photograph down and looked at the incident report I'd filed the morning after we flew out. Structure destroyed by fire. Fire behavior erratic due to terrain-influenced wind. Cause of structure loss. Direct flame contact. I'd written it in the same language I'd used for every incident report I'd filed in 12 seasons. It said nothing true about what happened. What I know, and have not written anywhere, is this. The fire was not protecting the house. It was maintaining a perimeter. It had been maintaining that perimeter for longer than any single fire could burn, returning every late August to the same grid, burning to the same boundary. And when we entered the perimeter, when I walked into that house and broke whatever the interior of that house was, it finished the cycle. It burned the house clean and went out. The cycle is finished. The house is gone. The perimeter is gone. Whatever returned to that grid every August for as long as the records exist has completed something, and my crew was the instrument of that completion, whether we knew it or not. I don't know if that is better or worse than the alternative. I picked up the phone and dialed the scheduling office. It rang twice before a woman's voice answered. I recognized her. Sharon, who handled the August rotations and had been doing it longer than I'd been jumping. "Easton Harvey," I said. confirming availability for the August rotation.
Hold on.
I heard papers rustling and the sound of a keyboard.
You want the same region?
Yes.
Any conflicts?
No. She made a sound like she was writing something down.
Got it. You're on the list.
Thanks. She hung up. I set the phone down and looked at the post-fire aerial I'd requested after we flew out. It had arrived the same day as the 1961 photograph. The clearing was there, the same oval shape, the same approximate dimensions. Green grass to the edge of a clean stone foundation. The pine still standing where the laundry line had been tied. No structure. No smoke damage on the trees facing inward. The foundation was empty. The grass unburned right to the edge of the stone. The house was gone. Whatever the cycle was, it ended. I know this. I also know that I have not asked Asher Davenport what he knew, and that Asher has not volunteered it, and that Asher has also not requested a reassignment. I know this because I checked. I don't know what I expect to find in August. The house is gone. The foundation is there. The grid will be quiet, or it won't, and either way I have no framework for what that means. 12 seasons of knowing what fire does and why it does it, and the thing I keep coming back to is not the house, not the boot prints, not the corridor held open through the burn. It is the moment the lamp went out. Simultaneous with the fire, not after, not before, simultaneous. The house burned with no smoke, the glass intact, the lamp still burning behind it, and then the lamp went out, and at the same moment, the fire consuming the house extinguished. Not died down, not banked, extinguished. I have no framework for that. I do not think a framework exists. I am going back in August to see if the grid is quiet. I am aware that this is not a sufficient reason. I am going anyway. I picked up the 1961 photograph and turned it face down on the desk. The back was blank except for the date stamp and the grid designation in faded typewriter ink. I left it there and stood up. Outside the window, the high desert stretched flat and pale under the last light. The Ochoko Mountains were a dark line on the horizon, the draws and ridges I knew by designation, but had never seen from the ground folding into each other until they disappeared. I am going back in August, not because I have an answer, because the lamp went out at the same moment as the fire, and I have not found a framework for that, and I do not think one exists.